Yesterday, the European Parliament voted to approve safeguards for the Mercosur trade deal. That's the trade deal between the European Union and the Mercosur countries in South America, primarily Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay. Now, I know that you have come in for a lot of flack since the vote in relation to referring to the European Courts of Justice. You voted yesterday for the safeguards, as did many of your colleagues here in the Parliament from Ireland. How can you, I suppose, allay the concerns? And I'm not saying anything that's a surprise to you.
Yeah.
You know that you have faced criticism from your own constituents and further afield across Ireland in terms of people feeling that you said one thing and did another.
Yeah.
Or, I know you released a video to explain it, but it didn't seem to quell that criticism that's coming from farmers. So where is the disconnect there? What are they not understanding?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, a hell of a lot of fact and fiction has blurred. And Mercosur has been ongoing for 20 odd years. And I don't need to tell your listenership or readership that they've been following it. And they're as close to European legislators as any other sector because they rely so heavily on the likes of the Common Agriculture Policy. I mean, first and foremost, I have stressed time and time again, I'm against the overall Mercosur deal. But what the European Court of Justice referral vote was last month in Strasbourg here in Parliament was not about the deal. It was about referring our judicial and our legislative requirements to vote on a deal. Instead, we sent it to a court for 2 years. And what sadly was not given the full picture, and I take responsibility for not communicating that effectively, other MEPs stood centre stage and said a lot of different things that I don't agree with. And yet, we'll get into it, but yesterday voted against safeguards. So talking in my mind out of both sides of their mouth. But for me, kicking the can down the road only creates uncertainty. What I wanted was two things. First and foremost was to vote on the deal in the Parliament last month. If we had that, given the mood of the Parliament, we would have killed the deal. The second was, if that vote couldn't have happened on the actual trade deal, we should have been given the grace of 6 months. We scrutinise the text in the Mercosur trade deal. We get our safeguards in place, knowing if the deal does go through, bear in mind the bigger picture is 22 member state wants it to. So you have to keep that in mind too, not just Ireland and the few others. It is wanted by others. But if we had taken that 6 months and really scrutinised the text, put the safeguards in place, and then if the Council and Commission, which under EU treaties are entitled to do, provisionally applied the agreement or kicked off the agreement, or we had another vote in here and it could pass, then our farmers are in a much better standing because the safeguards are in place. Or we could have spent the next 6 months lobbying member states, particularly our council members, to kill the deal also. But none of those two options were given. And instead, for me, sending something to the Court of Justice for 2 years is literally creating uncertainty, because now what we have is more than likely, and if any other MEP tells you differently, it's false. More than likely, we could see a provisional agreement in place from the Commission and the Council. All we need is one Mercosur country, more than likely Paraguay, based off the speed of their national government on this, to ratify it, and then it's in play. And what we did this week was voted on safeguards. And sadly, when you have MEPs, particularly Irish ones, who are barking the loudest about how this deal is bad, if they vote against safeguards, so that's making sure every 6 months the Commission is responsible for a monitoring report. At any point, the market drops by 5%, or we see impact on our beef sector in particular by 5%, the deal is stalled, or certainly that portion of that deal is stalled. When we remove those safeguards, then we're creating further uncertainty, and we're lying to the Irish farmer. And for me, that's why I voted in favour of the safeguards. And now we continue to lobby to make sure the Commission ensures that if this provisional agreement goes in place, those safeguards are going to be attached to that. See, and I know I'm talking for a long time, and I apologise, but anything that's said in a 280 characters of a tweet on X or in a Facebook post is not actually giving fact, and they're just telling people what they want to hear. When in actual sense, we are one country of 27. And for me, kicking cans and creating uncertainty is not the reason why I got elected.
But can you appreciate, obviously you work in the Parliament, and you know, as journalists we're familiar with the mechanisms of the Parliament. For an ordinary beef farmer on the ground, they don't understand perhaps the length of time it takes. They don't understand the mechanisms of getting to vote on an overall trade deal versus farmers associated the vote to refer to the European Court of Justice as, even if it's a delay tactic, as something positive because it was delaying what they don't want. So can you understand their thinking of why they are angry, and they feel anyone who voted against the referral to the Court of Justice meant that they, you know, were not in favour of delaying it and stopping it, and they were fearful it was going to come in with the vote of bringing it in April, May, June, July of this year anyway.
I mean, for sure, absolutely.
So they associated it with.
And as soon as we finished the vote on the European Court of Justice referral last Strasbourg, I was out in a farm the next day in Galway. I was with Macra and Affirma up in Sligo, so on the Saturday for their King and Queen. So I was immediately put into, and rightly so. I mean, I don't stand here and not want to get held accountable to media, or most importantly to citizens who elected me, or who I am their representative, one of five. But for me, I think it's incredibly important. This is where the fact and fiction gets mixed. So, and what I've said to farmers around rings in the last month or so, did they want me to kick something down the road for 2 years, knowing that if the council and commission put in a provisional agreement, there's no safeguards, and then I'm sitting on my hands for 2 years as their legislator, their parliamentarian, giving out about something that I couldn't change? Or do we have the vote and then we make sure safeguards are in place, knowing the larger picture? 22 member states wanted it to happen, and I'm not elected to the 22 member states that wanted it. I've spoken at length to colleagues who have lobbied me to say it's good for our wine sector, our cheese sector, our farm machinery sector, obviously our other services. Absolutely taken that on board. But I'm from the west of Ireland, and beef and suckler farmers are a large part of that. And now my learnings from that is around communication and being effective and making sure I'm ahead of people who like to blur fact and fiction. And when you look at the likes of the EU-India deal that could come into play, now a percentage of agricultural products are not included in that, but what is our access to selling our lamb. And from a West of Ireland perspective, that's really beneficial. So how do I get out in front of that to make sure, to your point, Mary and Joe down the road from me, who are farmers, who are not following the legislative technical nonsense that we talk here sometimes. That's a quote from my father now, not from anybody else. But how we get out in front of that and really give them the overall understanding. And you know, a lot of politics at play. A lot of you know, there's the narrative, once you're explaining, you're losing, but once I'm explaining, I'm doing my job. And while I absolutely understand the frustrations and the disappointments, I've heard it firsthand. You don't have to go too far down the Facebook threads to see some flavoured comments. I also know in the long run, if this provisional agreement comes into play, and if safeguards weren't included, then I'd have farmers looking at me saying, why the hell didn't you just protect us, never mind stop the deal? And for me, if my job here is to scrutinise legislation, then what am I sending it to a court of justice, considering there's precedent set? And where I fear with this is, with all these trade deals coming down, Australia, Malaysia, India, obviously our relationship with the US is under pressure, then I certainly don't want to create a precedent that we're sending everything to the European Court of Justice and then turning around to people in 2029 when I hopefully rerun and saying, I didn't do anything because I sent my job elsewhere. That's not good enough either.